okay, I've done the playing field of these decisions that delimited it. But now I'm going to get to the allies, and some allies are better than others. And here we got Mao and Khrushchev. Look at these lovebirds. Boy, when that divorce took place, boy, did it mess up the extended family. Never mind. For my purposes tonight, I'm going to use the word alliance really loosely. If you sign a mutual defense pact, for my purposes tonight, that makes you an alliance. Allies. And if you're a political scientist, you've got something that's much more complicated, but forget it. I just can't handle it. So we're going to do it this way. All right. So Stalin didn't think much of Nehru at all. He thought he was a lackey of British colonialism. But Khrushchev thought India was really important to counterbalance China. And here's Nehru thinking about it. We have to be on friendly terms with both Russia and America. But actually, he felt much more in common with Russia. Why? Because he favored Fabian socialist economic policies that were much more akin to what's going on in Russia than it was in the United States. Moreover, the United States was segregated, and which appalled Nehru. And in addition, the United States was cozying up to all the colonial powers. So Nehru thought the Russians were the better bet. While all this is going on, the Indians were non-aligned, and they treated the Chinese really generously. And I've got a whole list of generosity. So India immediately recognizes China in 1950. Countries like the United States didn't forever. And when the San Francisco Treaty, I think it's signed in 1951 in the United States, ending the war with Japan, India refuses to sign because China and Russia aren't there to sign as well. And then to help China break out of its diplomatic isolation at the end of the Korean War, India signs a friendship treaty with China. And as part of that friendship treaty, it recognizes Chinese sovereignty over Tibet. Under international law, contrary to what Vladimir Putin is doing lately, under international law, if you recognize someone's sovereignty over territory, that is permanent. You cannot back out of it legally under international law. So the Chinese promise, I don't know, there's some like peaceful coexistence or whatever. They're promising the Indians, but that has no permanence under international law, whereas this thing does. And then from 1960 on, the Indians are voting to seat the People's Republic of China, not Taiwan, on the UN. Meanwhile, in the background, all this road building is going on. Those roads are being built between 1950 and 1957. And the Indians aren't going to figure out until 1958 that the roads are there. Meanwhile, roads completed. The Chinese want to complete their control over Tibet. And so they're going to send big armies up there. And Tibetan culture is much more, it's of Indian origin. It's not Chinese origin. So this repression of Tibetan culture just appalls the Indians. And then 2 days before the People's Liberation Army is going to make it into Lhasa, which is the capital of Tibet, the Dalai Lama flees. He's the spiritual leader of Tibet. He flees to India, where he's remained ever since, to the absolute horror and anger of China. So at about this time, the Chinese come to the Indians and say, look, why don't we do a swap on sovereignty? You recognize our sovereignty over that Aksai Chin plateau where nobody lives, but it's really good for the roads, for China's western route. And then we'll recognize your sovereignty over this much more densely populated Arunachal Pradesh. And Nehru doesn't want to hear anything about it. So during the Cuban Missile Crisis, when Russia is much too busy worrying about who's going to be lobbing nukes at whom, this is when China launches. And in the 1960s Sino-Indian War, and China just plain takes the Aksai Chin plateau. The Indians are appalled because they don't have any roads to be able to deploy up there, whereas the Chinese do. Their defeat is just total, and they can't believe the Chinese did this to them. Here's Nehru afterwards. There are not many instances in history where one country, that is India, has gone out of her way to be friendly and cooperative with the Chinese government and people and plead their cause in the councils of the world, and then for the Chinese government to return evil for good, and even to go to the extent of committing aggression and invade our sacred land. Who does this? So I get it. The Chinese get the territory they want. That was the goal of that war. But what they have done is taken a country, India, which had its leadership terribly idealistic, not interested in becoming militarized at all, and making them angry forever. India immediately doubles the size of its army to within the next 10 years to up to 750,000 people, creates 10 mountain divisions useful against China, and they've never ceased being so angry. And then if you think about this, what if, instead of playing this game this way, China and India had teamed up? I would suspect we would be in a completely very different world order now if that is what they'd done instead. But this is China's decision, not India's fault on this one. All right, so that wasn't great. So let's check out other possibilities. Once that happens to India, India is all of a sudden looking for Russia to counterbalance China. And you also have Pakistan wondering what to do. And what the Pakistani notice after all this, well, the Chinese are not going to be teaming up with India, right? They've just invaded the place. And so this is when Pakistan sees that China might have real possibilities as an ally. And Bhutto is going to play the China card for the nuclear chip, trying to get Chinese help for all of that. And here's what happens. So you have the 62 war. And then in 1963, Pakistan really inexplicably is ceding territory to China. Who does that? And there are various possibilities, but I'm surmising it's because it's going to be help on nuclear development. That would explain why you would give a lot of territory, but we don't know. There was supposed to be some mutual defense pact, maybe, and there's some other things going on. Anyway, you can imagine what it may or may not have been. Okay. In the case of Pakistan and China and India and Russia, they had quite a good relationship because the Pakistanis and the Chinese shared India as their problem, and the Russians and the Indians shared China as their problem, and that worked pretty well. But the United States was just a disaster from both Indian and Pakistani point of view and vice versa, because the United States wanted to befriend both of them. But if you befriend one, the other is appalled. And so the United States wound up appalling everybody. And so what the United States wanted to have happen is for India and Pakistan to put aside their differences and then combine against China and stop communism from spreading. India and Pakistan want to use the United States for maximum aid to use against the other, which is a non-starter for the United States. And then Pakistan really would like it if the United States would be nice with China as well, because Pakistan wants to have good relations with the United States and China. And that's a non-starter for the United States until 1971, when there are secret visits and things going. It's later on. Okay, so in 1962, India gets trounced in this war with China. They look like they're militarily feckless. And then in 1964, Nehru dies, right? He'd been the head of India since independence in 1947. He'd been there a long time, so he's dead. So 1965, if you're Pakistani, looks like a good year to settle border problems. And so what they do is first they invade through the south. If you look way down at the bottom there, the Rana Kuch, and that seems to go pretty well. And then they decide they want to go for the thing they really care about, which is Kashmir. And they do that. Well, the enemy gets the vote, and the Indians invaded straight through Lahore, which isn't remotely what the Pakistanis had in mind. And then the United States does a double arms embargo on both of them for doing this. And the problem is the Pakistanis are much more dependent on U.S. military aid. The Indians were more diversified, so they just didn't have enough spare parts to continue this thing. So it's a very unhappy event for them. They lose it. And what happens, neither the United States nor Russia wants either one of them fighting that war. The Russians are thinking, we want the military aid to go to India in order to counterbalance China, not to decimate the Pakistanis. And the United States doesn't want it either. So the United States is very happy that the Soviets broker the Tashkent Declaration that ends this war. But Pakistan is worse off after this thing. It is, and India has restored its reputation for knowing what it's doing on the battlefield. So for Pakistan, the United States is really problematic because we're interested in being nice to them when we want something out of them, and then we're not so interested in when we don't want something out of them because we don't share a primary enemy. So what we really wanted were listening bases. The technology of the day was such that if you want to surveil the Soviet Union, you want to send these big U-2 planes over, and given their ranges, and you're not supposed to be doing it, and so we had U-2 bases, I think Norway, West Germany, Turkey, Pakistan, and then Japan. And in addition, we had a listening base at Badabar, and these were really important things for us during this period. So we're paying the Pakistanis a lot of money to get it. Except there was one of these U-2 planes gets shot down over the Soviet Union. They finally get so they can, because they fly at really high altitudes, they shoot it down. And Khrushchev is furious. He hauls in the Pakistani ambassador in Moscow and he goes, "Where is this place, Peshawar? We've circled it on the map." And we're going to blow it off the map if you all don't wise up. And the Pakistanis are like, whoa, 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 whoa. And so between these sort of threats in 1960 about the U-2 and then the United States freezing arms in the 1965 war, which the Pakistanis believe that they lost it over that. Oh, yeah. And by the way, in that 1965 war, the United States had, when we provided arms to everybody, we said, oh, we will guarantee that no one uses it, that Pakistanis and Indians don't use it against each other. And of course, we could do nothing about that. And the 1965 war, the Pakistanis are using U.S. tanks to go after Indians in the largest tank war battle since World War II. So there are a lot of upset people in South Asia. But here is Ayub Khan, leader of Pakistan, telling the United States that the United States forgets that our security hazards and political liabilities have increased to a dangerous level due to this U-2 stuff. And we kept our part of the contract whilst the Americans betrayed us at every turn. They built up India against us. They failed to help us in the 65 war and finally stopped military aid. They think that we exist for their convenience and that our freedom is negotiable. Dream on. So when the lease came up for the listening post at Badabar in 1968, the Pakistanis canceled it. They're sick of it. Meanwhile, the Indians weren't too thrilled about the United States either. This is earlier when Franklin Delano Roosevelt was president. Here's Mahatma Gandhi telling him Allied support for freedom and democracy seems hollow so long as America has the Negro problem in her own home. Indians were appalled by segregation. They knew exactly which end of the bus they'd be sitting on. So there are issues both ways. And in fact, Nehru and his daughter Indira Gandhi found the United States really impossible to work with. And they looked at capitalism as the way station to imperialism and fascism, whereas Americans looked at socialism as the way station to communism. So there's no meeting of minds on all of this. And so if you look at the alignments of primary adversaries, India and Pakistan from most of the time are primary adversaries. India is always Pakistan's primary enemy, but you could argue that with the 62 war, is it Pakistan or is it China who's the primary adversary of India? And then when you get to the 1971 war, which I'll discuss a little more in a second, where Bangladesh is broken off and then Pakistan has less than half the population, then you could argue that for India, China is the primary adversary. And then if you look at that reshuffling, if you also look at the 1969 war that reshuffles the nuclear powers, so formerly Russia and China had shared the United States as their primary enemy, but after the 69 war, they're each other's primary enemy, and this gives the United States a swing position of team up with A or team up with B. And the United States teamed up with China to overextend Russia in the Cold War, because I had always felt that the Soviets were the bigger threat in those days. So anyway, as you're looking at alignments, you can apply this kind of framework to any country on the planet to try to figure out what's going on. And think about how alliances work. If I look at the World War II allies, probably one of the most effective alliances in world history, if you think about what people ultimately want, then the British want an empire in which the sun never sets. The United States wants to decolonize everybody. And Joe Stalin wants a communist wonderland. Those are mutually exclusive. But to get there, you have to go through the common way station of getting rid of Hitler. So the common existential threat can be a super glue of the most unlikely partners. But let's look at the axis. What they want at the end of the war are spheres of influence in different parts of the world. So for Italy, it's empire in the Mediterranean, Japan in the Pacific, and then Hitler, it's all over Eurasia. That's not mutually exclusive. But if you look who the primary enemy who stands in the way of those plans, it's Britain for Italy, it's Russia for the Germans, and for the Japanese, it's first China and then the United States. None of it aligns, so they fight parallel wars and allow the Allies to take them out in detail. So when you're thinking about alliances in the world today, when you're wondering what's going on with Iran or whatever, figure out who's their real primary enemy. Get it straight. Does that primary enemy, is that an existential threat for them? So if you've got countries that line up on same primary enemy, existential threat for all around, the most unlikely people will cooperate. On the other hand, people who are very likely to cooperate, maybe like the fascists, they all shared this basic ideology, but if they don't have the same primary enemy and the same theater of interest, geographically the same theater, they may not cooperate very well at all. So you can apply this to anything you want to apply to. So back to my game here. If you're looking at the cards people have to play, the United States has lousy cards because we don't share primary enemies with anybody. So it's a stalemate. You help India, the Pakistanis hate you. You help Pakistanis, the Indians hate you. It's no win. But if you look at India and Russia share a China problem. That's good. They can cooperate on that. And then you have Pakistan and China. They share an India problem. They can make things happen over that. So there are cards for them to play and zero for the United States to play. It's just the way it is. So the name of the game in strategy is to get the outcome that you want to have happen. And it's like, how do you play this game of 5-person, 5-country cutthroat billiards to get remotely what you want out of it? So for the English majors among you, I have a metaphor. For the rest of you, you can just bear with us. Imagine a game in which every ball can be a cue ball, and players can take turns, come, leave, do whatever at will. Sometimes they'll cooperate some of the time, but they don't necessarily want to put the same ball in the same pocket. And so if that's the case, there's going to be no enduring cooperation. And understand that you want to have, your goal is going to be the ultimate shot you want to take, but as you're taking the intervening shots, people are going to try to disrupt it. How on earth do you get through this game? So this is what the next section is all about. So if you look at this map and where Pakistan's located, it's this very strategic location in the center of, not quite center, but of Eurasia, the center of the Soviets' boundary there. And I'm going to give you a map. This is from Halford Mackinder. He's one of the most famous people to publish on geopolitics. This is his 1904 map. It's actually quite famous. And he talked about how Russia occupies the heartland. In his day, it was all these railway systems. He thought that was the prime piece of real estate in the world. And then it's surrounded by this intermarginal crescent. You look where Pakistan's located. It's right in the center there, right up by Russia. And it's a really crucial location for before satellite imagery is available to put listening posts on Russia. Russia's huge. So you got to have a bunch of listening posts to track their missiles and things. And then if you want access to Afghanistan, which when the Russians go there, we want access. And of course, when we go there, we really want access. So it's a strategic location. For the Pakistanis, the United States was so frustrating to deal with because we'd be on and off interested in them because we don't align on a primary enemy. So pre-satellite imagery, we really wanted to cozy up the Pakistanis so we could have U-2 bases, but then there are different technology changes. And before we get facilities in Iran, we want this listening post in Badabar. But technology will eventually change. And then for a while, we truly want the Pakistanis to get the mail through to China when we're trying to break China out of diplomatic isolation and then cooperate against the Soviet Union. And Pakistan delivers the mail. But then we set up an alternate setup in Paris to go through our embassies that way. And Pakistan is, again, irrelevant. And then when Russia's in Afghanistan, Pakistan is essential to get aid to insurgents to cause the Russians trouble. And then, of course, when we're in Afghanistan, we really want to cooperate with the Pakistanis, and that works until we cap Osama bin Laden without telling the Pakistanis in their territory, Abbottabad, and then relations are really not so great. And so it's a very bumpy ride. And in these periods when we really need the Pakistanis, we don't pay attention to human rights or the really big one, nuclear proliferation.